I poured crap on my parents' graves, and my girlfriend's old flame freaked out. Chapter. The first thing I did after I was reborn was secretly move my parents' graves. Then, I replaced their ashes with those of a stray dog. Not only that, but I also dumped a bucket of crap on the new grave. I did it because in my past life, my girlfriend's old flame said he wanted to come with her to pay respects to my parents. But after that day, I had nothing but bad luck. Meanwhile, everything started going his way. Not only did he get an offer from a top tech company, but he even won millions in the lottery. Not long after, I got sick and died. After I died, my spirit lingered around my girlfriend, and I overheard that old flame of hers sweet-talking her. It's all thanks to that dead boyfriend of yours. He let me swap my fate with his. He had no idea how good his life was supposed to be, but now that I've taken his destiny, everything that was his is mine. When I heard their conversation, I wanted to kill them. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day her old flame said he wanted to pay respects to my parents. Ethan, is this your parents' grave? Brandon looked at me, his face full of curiosity. I just nodded. Yeah. My mom and dad are right here. A flicker of light appeared in Brandon's eyes when he heard that. He even bowed to my parents' tombstone. Hey Ethan, can I burn some offerings for them too? It's just a small gesture from me, Brandon said with a smile. In my last life, I was actually touched when he said that. This time, however, I knew exactly what he meant by burning something. It was his way of stealing my good fortune. So this time, I flatly refused. No, that's okay, Brandon. They're my parents. It's more sincere if I do it myself. Hearing this, Brandon shot my girlfriend a helpless look. Chloe, I was just trying to show some respect. I didn't mean anything else by it. Ethan, Brandon is just trying to be nice. How could you just shut him down like that? Chloe immediately chimed in, looking at me. I looked at the two of them and sneered inwardly. Fine. If you want to burn something, go ahead. I spoke coolly. The moment the words left my mouth, Brandon shot Chloe a look. Chloe looked back at me and said, Ethan, let's go buy a bouquet of flowers to leave at the grave. In my past life, that's how Chloe got me out of the way. By the time we got back, Brandon had already finished his ritual. I had even asked him what he burned. He looked a little flustered at the time, but I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until after I died that I learned Brandon had used my parents' spiritual protection to steal my luck. This time, I wasn't about to stop him. After all, the ashes in that grave didn't belong to my parents. I had already moved my parents' real graves back to our hometown. The only person my mom and dad would be watching over was me. As I left with Chloe, I saw Brandon pull out a stack of yellow papers from his jacket. I could see his birth date and time written on them in his own blood. I just smiled, pretended I hadn't seen anything, and walked away with Chloe. By the time Chloe and I came back up the hill with the flowers, Brandon was already done. He even took the bouquet from my hands and said with a grin, Ethan, I even asked your parents to watch over you. I just gave a faint smile and didn't say a word. Looking at the triumphant expression on Brandon's face, I smiled to myself. Chapter. After saying goodbye to Chloe and Brandon, I went straight to the hospital for a full checkup. The doctor told me I was perfectly healthy. I finally let out a sigh of relief. In my past life, I died from a mysterious illness. This time, that wasn't going to happen again. When I got home, I received a phone call. It was from the company I'd been dreaming of joining, a high-security government agency. They told me I'd passed the interview and that I should start as soon as possible. I was stunned when I got the call. In my past life, this call never came. Instead, Brandon was the one who got a call from a major tech company on his way home. But this time, it was clear that I was the one who got the offer. Since the company was in another city, I immediately packed my things and prepared to leave. But I didn't expect Chloe to show up right as I was finishing up. Ethan, Brandon didn't get the offer. She looked at me and said he's pretty down about it, so I'm going to go spend some time with him. I listened to her and gave a small smile. Okay, you go do that. Chloe studied me carefully. Ethan, have your parents always been buried there? I just nodded. Of course. I knew she was getting suspicious. After all, Brandon and Chloe had once gone with me to have our fortunes told. The fortune teller had said that with my parents watching over me, I would succeed in whatever I did. That's why they targeted me. Chloe, do you really think I'd forget where my own parents are buried? I said, faking exasperation. Hearing this, Chloe smiled. You're right. Well, I'm going to go see Brandon, she said. I pretended to be concerned about him, telling Chloe to comfort him. Ethan, you used to hate it when I hung out with Brandon. Why are you pushing me to go today? Chloe asked curiously before she left. I just smiled. I still don't like it. But he's upset, right? Go keep him company. I trust you, Chloe, I said with a grin. Chloe just nodded and left. As soon as she was gone, I quickly finished packing and called my landlord. I told him I was moving out immediately and that he could keep the security deposit. After that, I booked a ticket for the next flight out and rushed to the airport. I didn't feel safe until I was through security. I finally felt like I was in the clear. I couldn't imagine what other schemes Brandon and Chloe would have cooked up if I had stayed. This time, I wasn't going to let them succeed. As for Brandon, his bad luck was just getting started. After all, I was the only one who knew he had just adopted a stray dog as his parents. On top of that, I'd poured crap all over the grave, which would have completely wiped out any good fortune associated with it. From now on, Brandon was only going to have bad luck. There was no way he'd have a happy ending. And as for Chloe, being with Brandon would only bring her more misfortune. Since that was the case, I was definitely going to stay far away from them. Chapter. While waiting at my gate, I opened my phone and saw a post from Brandon and Chloe on social media. They were on a trip together somewhere. The picture they took looked incredibly intimate. Seeing it sent me back for a moment. I started dating Chloe about a year ago. A classmate dragged me to a fortune teller, and it just so happened that Brandon and Chloe were there too. They overheard my birth date and time, and right after that, Chloe started pursuing me like crazy. I didn't understand it at first. Later, I realized she was after my birth chart. To Chloe, my destiny was exceptionally good. She got close to me for Brandon's sake. Now looking at the two of them together, I just smiled and turned off my phone. When my plane landed, someone was already there to pick me up. They had arranged everything for me. Because it was a high-security agency, the safety protocols were top-notch. I even saw plenty of security guards on patrol when I was checking into my new apartment. That, more than anything, put my mind at ease. After I finished my onboarding paperwork, my new boss told me I could start next week and should use the next few days to get settled. I finally felt relaxed. I went straight back to my new place and collapsed onto the bed. The whole day had been exhausting, and I fell asleep the second my head hit the pillow. I was half asleep when I got a call from Chloe. Her voice was frantic. Ethan, you need to come to the hospital. What? I mumbled, still groggy, before realizing it was her. Chloe, what happened? I asked, pretending to be curious. Ethan, Brandon and I got into a car accident. We're in the hospital. Can you please come? She said urgently. I'm sorry, Chloe, I can't, I said into the phone. I got a job, and I've already moved away. The moment I said that, Chloe yelled into the phone, Ethan, what are you talking about? You didn't have a job. How can you say you found one? Besides, I just saw you yesterday. I know what this is. You're just upset because I went out with Brandon. Ethan, stop being so childish and get over here. She roared. I just chuckled softly. Chloe, I really did get a job. And besides, I'm starting to think you care more about Brandon than you do about me. So, Chloe, I think we should break up. Before she could even react, I hung up. It was over between us. After all, they were the ones in for a world of bad luck now. My own luck was finally back where it belonged. After hanging up, I was about to go back to sleep when her number lit up my screen again. I frowned, then just turned my phone off completely. Now I could finally get some rest. Chapter. Over the next 2 weeks, I started taking on more and more responsibilities at work. My boss was extremely pleased with my performance, and even told me that if I successfully completed my current project, he would let me lead one of my own. That, of course, was all the motivation I needed. During that time, Chloe and Brandon kept trying to call me. I couldn't be bothered to answer and eventually just blocked their numbers. I thought blocking them would be the end of it, but they were relentless, like leeches, constantly calling me from different numbers. Every time I saw it was Chloe, I'd just hang up immediately. A friend told me that Brandon had been having a rough time lately. The car crash had messed up his face pretty badly. He was still in the hospital and would need reconstructive surgery. Chloe had broken a rib too. Not only that, but Brandon had apparently dragged Chloe into a high-stakes gambling binge right before the crash. They lost everything. Now they were both saddled with a ton of debt. When my friend found out Chloe and I had broken up, he was relieved for me. Ethan, you have no idea. They got into the crash because they were arguing right after losing all that money. And now they're hitting everyone up for cash. Ethan, if Chloe comes begging, don't you dare give in. When she was with you, she was still hanging out with Brandon every day. You couldn't even tell who her real boyfriend was. I listened to my friend and laughed. I know. Then I hung up. I thought it would take longer for Brandon's bad luck to kick in, but I never expected it to be so immediate. In my last life, he and Chloe left my parents' grave and took off. At the time, Chloe told me they were celebrating Brandon getting the job offer from that big tech company. It turns out they were going to gamble together. Brandon must have thought his luck was unbeatable, so he went all in, not knowing that this time, I had already rewritten our fates. Hearing the news about them from my friend only made me happier. Their troubles were just beginning. The next morning, I woke up to another call from Chloe. This time, she sounded even more desperate. Ethan, please come back. I really need you. Chloe, have you forgotten? I already broke up with you, I said coldly, listening to her voice on the other end. Her voice grew more frantic. Ethan, I never agreed to break up with you. Besides, you break up with me right after I get hurt? Does that seem right to you? You have to take responsibility for this. I scoffed at her words. Chloe, you were with Brandon when it happened. Why should I be responsible? Besides, you and Brandon seem pretty happy together, don't you? And one more thing, Chloe. We are broken up, I said coolly. So please stop calling me. I was about to hang up after saying my piece. But then, a cold voice came through the phone. It was Brandon. Ethan, that grave wasn't your parents', was it? What the hell did you do? Chapter. Hearing Brandon's hysterical voice on the phone, I pretended not to understand. What? How is that possible? Of course it was my parents' grave. Brandon, do you really think I'd mistake my own parents' grave? Stop pretending, Ethan. I know it wasn't your parents' grave. Brandon screamed from the other end. Ethan, do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined me. I don't understand, Brandon, I said with a cold laugh. How have I ruined you? Even if it wasn't my parents' grave, what does that have to do with you? My question was met with silence from the other end. Ethan, just tell me, whose grave was it? He finally asked, his voice laced with urgency. Brandon, I told you it was my parents' grave. I didn't know why Brandon was so desperate, but it was obvious something was seriously wrong on his end. He clearly wanted to say more, but I was done talking to him. I just hung up. Then I got back to work. A few days later, while I was at my desk, I got a call from the cemetery. Mr. Hayes, your parents' grave was desecrated last night. I paused for a second when I heard that. What happened? Last night, someone smashed the headstone and even took the urn from inside. I knew immediately it had to have been Brandon. He must have realized something was wrong. After all, not only was I fine, but my life was getting better and better. Meanwhile, he and Chloe had been cursed with bad luck from that day on. So the two of them must have figured it out. The cemetery manager said they had already called the police and would continue to investigate. They also offered me a significant amount of money as compensation, hoping I wouldn't pursue the matter further. I happily accepted. After hanging up with the cemetery, I went back to my work. But I wasn't surprised when Chloe called me first thing the next morning. Ethan, that wasn't your parents' grave. She yelled into the phone. Those weren't even human ashes. Hearing her words, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Chloe, does it matter if it was my parents' grave or not? And what does any of this have to do with you? My questions left Chloe speechless. I just smiled. Chloe, we're broken up. So please stop bothering me. I was about to hang up. But then, Brandon's almost hysterical voice came through the phone. Ethan, you tell me where your parents' grave is right now? And what does that have to do with you? I sneered. I already told you, That was their grave, but you didn't believe me. I knew their bad luck was just getting started. By this point, they were probably on the verge of a complete breakdown. Hearing my words, Brandon said desperately, "Ethan, you know something, don't you?" "What could I possibly know?" I asked, feigning curiosity. "You have to know something. You did something to your parents' grave to make me end up like this." He shouted angrily. I just chuckled. "Brandon, that's just superstition. Besides, why would I ever do something like that?" Chapter. After hanging up, I felt a wave of satisfaction. I knew Chloe and Brandon must be in a world of trouble right now. Sure enough, a few days later, a friend called to fill me in. He said Chloe and Brandon were drowning in debt. The loan sharks were now hunting them down relentlessly. Men were staking out Chloe's office every day, waiting for her. Because of the whole mess, Chloe got fired. Now she was jobless. Brandon's situation was even worse. He'd been grabbed by the debt collectors. They threatened him, saying if he didn't pay up within a week, they would ship him overseas to work off the debt. The two of them were at their wits' end. "Ethan, Chloe is looking for you everywhere. She definitely wants you to pay off her debts. You can't agree." My friend warned me. I thanked him for the heads up. I knew Chloe wasn't just looking for me to bail her out. She also desperately needed to find out where my parents' real grave was. But how could she ever have imagined that I'd moved their graves on the very first day I came back to life? I even poured crap over the fake grave just to make sure Brandon's luck turned sour. I'd even done my research. I knew that was the best way to make the curse backfire on him. And isn't that exactly what happened? Brandon had adopted a dog as his parents, and on top of that, he was cursed with bad luck. This was just the beginning of his misery. After hanging up, I was about to get back to work when I got a call from the security desk downstairs. They told me a man and a woman were here to see me. They seemed very agitated and were desperate to meet with me. Since I worked in a secure facility, they couldn't come inside. I walked to the entrance and saw Chloe and Brandon. The second they saw me, they rushed towards me. "Ethan, do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined us," Brandon yelled before I could even say a word. I just looked at them coldly. "How have I ruined you?" I asked calmly. Brandon's face darkened. "Ethan, it had to be you. You pulled some kind of trick. Ethan, do you realize all my bad luck these past few days is because of you? How could you be so vicious? All I wanted was to borrow a little of your parents' good fortune. Why did you have to do this to me?" He screamed hysterically. Hearing his words, I couldn't help but laugh in disgust. In my last life, Brandon was the one who literally killed me. And now he had the nerve to play the victim. "Brandon, I don't know what you're talking about," I said, playing dumb. He stared at me, his eyes filled with hatred. "Ethan, there's no way you don't know. You're the one who caused all my bad luck. You have to take responsibility for this," he shouted furiously. I looked at his crazed expression and said flatly, "Brandon, I don't know what you're trying to do, but I'm very busy right now. I have a lot of work to do, and I don't have time for you." With that, I turned to go back inside. But as I tried to leave, Chloe and Brandon blocked my path. Chloe grabbed my arm to stop me. Chapter. "Ethan, you're not going anywhere," Chloe said, staring at me. "You did this to Brandon. You can't just walk away without taking responsibility." "How did I do anything to him?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Ethan, stop pretending. We already dug up the ashes from your parents' grave." "Those weren't your parents' ashes," Brandon shouted angrily. "What?" I acted shocked, then looked at Brandon. "There must have been a mistake. I'll have to ask the cemetery what's going on." The two of them looked at me, their faces contorted with rage. Chloe grabbed my arm tighter, trying to drag me away. "Ethan, you're going to give me and Brandon an explanation today. You're coming with me right now," she said, trying to pull me along with all her strength. I just smiled at her efforts. She had no idea what kind of place this was. I yelled toward the security booth, "Help! They're trying to kidnap me." Instantly, several guards rushed out of the booth. They were all fully armed. Their eyes were locked on Chloe and Brandon. The sight of armed guards terrified them. Chloe immediately let go of my arm. "Mr. Hayes, what's going on?" The head of security asked me. "This is my ex-girlfriend. We broke up and she couldn't handle it, So she's trying to drag me away against my will, I said, pointing at Chloe. The guards' expressions turned hostile as they looked at her. They promptly escorted Chloe and Brandon off the premises. They also assured me that those two would never be allowed near the building again. If they ever showed up, they would be immediately removed. I finally felt at ease. I knew I was safe now. I thanked the guards and went back to work. Back at my desk, I got a message from Brandon. Ethan, I know I was wrong. I wasn't thinking straight. I wanted to steal your luck. Ethan, I'm being punished for it now, and you're the only one who can save me. Just tell me where your parents are buried, and I can reverse my luck. Ethan, please, I'm begging you. Save me. I'm going to die if you don't. I glanced at the messages, smiled faintly, and blocked him. Chloe sent me a bunch of messages too. They all said the same thing. I just ignored them. I told her I had no idea how my parents' grave got swapped, and that I couldn't help her now. I also asked her to stop bothering me. Then I blocked her number as well. After that, I focused on my work. Things went smoothly and I finished my project ahead of schedule. My boss was incredibly impressed and even put me in charge of my own project, just as he'd promised. Then one day, I got a call from the cemetery. Mr. Hayes, we've filed a police report, and they've caught the person who robbed your parents' grave. The manager told me the thief was Chloe. I wasn't surprised. Brandon, cursed with bad luck, wouldn't have dared to go himself, so it had to have been her. I just told them that the matter needed to be handled seriously. As for the rest, I no longer cared. The cemetery assured me they would pursue the case to the fullest extent. Chapter. A few days later, the police called. They told me Chloe had confessed but wanted to see me one last time. I agreed. When I arrived at the detention center and saw Chloe, she looked like a completely different person from just a few days ago. Her hair was a mess, and all traces of her former beauty were gone. She stared at me, her eyes filled with venom. Ethan, do you know that you're the one who destroyed Brandon? All Brandon wanted was to change his luck. Why couldn't you just let him have it? Those loan sharks took him away. Who knows what's going to happen to him now? Ethan, this is all your fault. Listening to her furious accusations, I just smiled. Chloe, is this why you wanted to see me? To tell me this? If that's the case, then I have nothing more to say to you. I looked at her and said, as for you for desecrating a grave, you're looking at least 3 years in prison. Her face turned pale with rage. Ethan, because of you, Brandon was taken. They're going to sell him overseas. Don't you see how serious this is? I'm just asking you to go save him. I looked at her and shook my head. Sorry, I can't do that. In my last life, they both caused my death. This time, there was no way I was going to save Brandon. He was my enemy. She looked at me, her eyes filled with disappointment, and then said quietly, Ethan, how did you know about our plan? When did you swap out your parents' ashes? She stared at me, her eyes full of confusion. She and Brandon had plotted against me from the very beginning, but she never imagined things would turn out like this. I just smiled. Chloe, you brought this on yourselves by trying to harm someone else. Enjoy your time in prison. With that, I stood up to leave. Chloe looked at me desperately. Ethan, I'm begging you, please save Brandon. I know you can do it. I shook my head and walked away without looking back. In my last life, I was blind to have fallen for Chloe. This time, I saw everything clearly. I wouldn't let a single one of them get away with it. Besides, did they really think the backlash from a curse was that simple? Brandon was definitely going to die. As for Chloe, she had been tainted by his bad luck, and she wouldn't have a good end either. Sure enough, a few days later, my friend called me. Ethan, did you hear? They said Brandon is dead. My friend whispered into the phone. He owed too much money and had no way to pay it back, so they sold him overseas. I heard that as soon as he got there, he was harvested for organs. By the time they found him, his body was completely hollowed out. When Chloe heard the news in jail, they say she went insane. She started biting everyone, like she had rabies. A group of inmates fought back and hit her in the head. Apparently, she had a brain hemorrhage on the spot. She was dead by the time they got her to the hospital. My friend on the phone kept going on about what a tragic end they both met. I just smiled calmly. I knew this was the retribution they deserved. As for me, I had just completed my project and was waiting for my promotion and raise. The end.